Good evening and a happy new year to everybody. I'll begin with a few predictions. The first half of this year is going to be absolutely dominated by the cost of living crisis. Yes, inflation is back. Taxes will be going up in the spring. But the big one is going to be energy bills, where millions of people, and I mean millions of people, are likely to struggle to be able to pay them. And I sense there is a bit of a rebellion building. I've been banging on for 10 years or more about the extent to which our electricity bills are 20 to 25% higher than they should be because we're subsidising big global businesses that build wind farms, and we've also been subsidising rich landowners that put wind turbines on their land. That's just part of the reason for that subsidy. That is now, at last, I wish I wasn't always so far ahead of it, but that is at last becoming a story. We still have 5% VAT on our heating bills. That could be removed as we've now got Brexit, and yet that isn't really happening. But within the Conservative Party, there is a rebellion beginning to build. Pressure on Boris Johnson for a U-turn on his net zero policy. Labour, well, as an opposition party, they have asked for the 5% to be scrapped. Nice to see they are finally embracing a little bit of Brexit, but they're making no real impact. Interestingly, Reform UK are now on the rise, and I'll talk more about that later in the show. So the cost of living crisis, I think, is going to be the dominant issue of our times for the next at least 6 months. After that, well, I'm predicting that COVID will ease, that actually we're learning to live with it, that Omicron, perhaps in a funny sort of way, is a bit of a blessing. And it's at that moment that we'll start to look at the National Health Service, I think, in a very different way. We know that the waiting list for procedures is approaching 6 million. And there is absolutely no way the NHS is ever going to be able to catch up with that. And I think a big debate on that, a big debate on the money we pump into it. And I sense and seen already in some opinion polls that confidence in the way the NHS is run is beginning to fall quite sharply. And that's very, very dangerous for the government, as John Major learnt back in the middle 1990s. And finally, on Boris and Brexit, well, the good news is that Brexit is now a settled issue. It really is. The war is genuinely over. An Ipsos Mori poll today showing only 24% of people would vote in a referendum to rejoin. It's done. It's over. And let's give credit to Boris Johnson. Give him credit for actually having the courage to back Brexit, for managing to unite a very split Conservative Party, for winning the general election in 2019 on a Get Brexit Done message. But here's the problem. The deal was never quite as oven-ready as he promised. There is much more to do. Northern Ireland is in a very difficult constitutional situation, with perhaps even the threat of some form of sectarian violence coming back. The fishing industry, frankly, has been dealt the most awful hand. And in terms of regulation, entrepreneurship, we're just not doing the right things. And I have to say, I think Boris Johnson was the right man for 2019. I don't think he's the right man now, either for this or many other issues. And I would be surprised, very surprised, if he was still here this time next year. But we'll see. They're my predictions. But what I can tell you for certain is that there is quite a problem building in the Red Wall. Those seats, especially in the Midlands and the north of England, many of which had been Labour for decades. I mean, some going back to the 1920s, that the Conservatives took on the back of a Brexit message, on the back of an immigration message in 2019. But now, I think rising to the top of the agenda for the moment is the issue of energy. I'm joined by Lee Anderson, Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashfield. Lee, a Labour convert to Conservatism, you won that seat of Ashfield, and well done you for doing it. But right now, we see a government that won't take off the 5% VAT on heating bills, despite it being a Brexit promise to do so. We see a government pushing for heat pumps, which I suspect many in your constituency and others simply can't afford. We see an all-out push towards net zero. We see big subsidy put on top of our electricity bills. I mean, Lee, you're not really a Conservative. You're almost like a Green Party member now, really, aren't you?
Well, I've never been in the Green Party, Nigel. Unfortunately, I was in the Labour Party for many, many years. But, you know, it's good to know that you was 10 years ahead of the curve on these predictions. But let me tell you, myself and the blokes I used to work down the pit with in the 80s and 90s, we were 35 years ahead of this curve. We knew when the pits were closing, when we were shutting them all down in the 80s and 90s, we knew this day was going to happen. And we've sort of sleepwalked in this. So I don't think it's fair to blame the current government. It's been successive governments over the past 40 and 50 years that's allowed this to happen. And it is a problem, Nigel. It's a very big problem. And
I take that, Lee. It's a fair point. It's a fair point.
Really start to notice in their bills.
We import coal. We import natural gas for reasons that are absolutely beyond me when we've got stacks of it here in this country. But it is the rush towards net zero. It is the absolute belief in wind energy. I mean, these are the hallmarks of Boris Johnson's government, and there appears to be a reluctance to do anything about rapidly rising bills. And that puts you under enormous political pressure, doesn't it?
And so it should do, Nigel. That's my job, to be under that pressure from my constituents and to be held account. Now, you know, it's not very windy in the North Sea at the moment, is it? And you're quite right, we're reliant on gas from Scandinavia. And you're quite right in saying that we've got plenty of gas and oil in this country. And I'm of the mind, I'm in the camp that believes that we should be looking at alternatives and being self-dependent in this country, you know, even if it's just a short-term measure while we transition to, well, look, nobody disagrees with the journey the government is trying to get us on. We all agree that we've got to save the planet, we've got to do much better, we've got to be greener, we've got to leave the planet in a much better condition than when we arrived. But it's just, I think it's the pace and the cost that really, really bothers people. Look, if we're going to burn fossil fuels, which we are, we're burning coal, we're using gas, we're actually accepting that that's okay to do, but we're not accepting that it's okay to extract in this country. And
well, I know.
A little bit hypocritical.
I know.
Get it out of the ground here.
No, and that would provide jobs, and I get that, and I fully understand that. Lee, finally, Boris Johnson has U-turned on many issues since he became Prime Minister. Are there enough of you on the Conservative backbenches, and are these poll figures that were out this last weekend showing Labour 16 points ahead in the red wall constituencies, is this enough to get this government to rethink its plans?
Well, I'll tell you what, Nigel, if Labour is 16 points ahead in Ashford, I'll show my backside in Tesco window. That's absolutely nonsense. But it's midterm. You know, we do have these blips. You know, every single government has these blips. We're 11, 12 years into a government now. It's bound to happen. We've had a pandemic. We've got a bit of a cost of living crisis with fuel bills going through the roof. You know, he's had a tough time, Boris has, you know, and it's not just the backbenchers in the Conservative Party, it's the whole of Parliament that needs to sort this out. And, you know, I look at the opposition benches, they've got no interest in sorting this out. They're just playing politics with it all the time. I think, you know, we're strong enough within the Conservative Party to get this right.
Well, we will see. Lee, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.